Hello, welcome to session 6A, Connecting Communities and Building Collections, Archiving a Community's Resilience During a Pandemic. I'm Anita Doring and I'm a member of the MAC 2021 Programming Committee. Before I turn it over to our session presenters, I'd like to go over a few logistical details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions rather than the chat box. The session also has the chat feature enabled, and you're free to use that to make comments or share relevant information with your colleagues, but try to direct questions to the Q&A so they're not missed by the presenters. I would also like to share MAC's expectations for conduct during the session. By participating in the session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and the other session participants. Any type of harassing or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments, slurs, threats, or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disruptive behavior, that person will be removed. So thank you in advance for following these guidelines. Finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experiences by way of social media, and I will be adding to the chat the suggested conference hashtags. So thank you, and I will now turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Anita. I'm so excited to have everyone here today. I'm joined by my colleagues, Carla Myers, Jackie Johnson, and Kim Hoffman. My name is Rachel Makarowski, and I'll be the one who starts us off. So a little bit about the background of our pandemic collection. It was through a conversation that I had with one of my colleagues from Indiana University, Carrie Schweer, who had started the Coronavirus Days Archive Your Story project. And as she was talking to me about this project, I started to think about and really ponder the implications of what it would mean to start a pandemic archive here at Miami University. So looking at what it is that she did at Indiana University, as well as what the Mass Observation Project based in the UK has done, we decided to go ahead and start a pandemic collection at Miami. And we had a few reasons why it was that we wanted to do it at Miami. It wasn't just feeling inspired and using this as a rallying point in difficult, turbulent times, though that certainly was a part of our experience. But we also wanted to provide potential participants with a chance and avenue to really emotionally process the stressful and traumatic experience that everyone in the world was experiencing at that point. Journaling and keeping a memoir really helps you to be able to think about what it is that you're experiencing, and that can really help mental health wise. But also a community diary collection really fit in. We already knew the potential value of a diary collection, and that's because Miami University already holds 2 collections consisting of student diaries. We have the William E. Smith student diaries, which primarily are concerned with looking at the daily life of students during World War II and post-World War II. And then as well, we have the Preston B. Albright student diaries collection, which examines student experiences during the Korean War. So we already had this rich collection of diaries. So to us, it made perfect sense to go ahead and launch the project, the Documenting COVID-19 Pandemic Project. So first off, after deciding that we wanted to do this, we decided to make a call for volunteers. As part of this, we needed to decide who our target audience was, the types of submissions we were going to allow, and the necessary information to collect. We didn't just want to put out a call out there and say, hey, if you want to make a diary, feel free to donate it to us. That's how you end up with way more submissions than it is that you're anticipating, as well as ones that fall outside of the scope. So we decided to make it a little bit easier on ourselves and have people who are looking to donate be connected to the Miami University or Oxford, Ohio communities. And if anyone fell outside of the scope, we were determined to not just toss away their submission, but instead be on the lookout for other institutions or historical societies who might be interested in getting such a submission. We also wanted to consider what it was that we would accept. We didn't want it to be something that was just a single object that had no dialogue surrounding it. We wanted to really get at people's emotions and lived experiences. So part of what we wanted was some type of format that would also allow for that commentary from the submitter. We also wanted to be able to keep in touch with them. So we wanted to make sure that we at the very least captured their email, if not also their phone number, and to be able to have a space where we could share our contact information with them so that they could talk to me or my co-lead for this project, Jackie Johnson, if they had any type of questions. Once we had the call for volunteers created, we needed a space to share it, right? So we shared it in a few different places. We used the Instagram accounts for both Miami University Special Collections, as well as Miami University Libraries Instagram accounts. Miami University Libraries also has a Twitter and blog. So we also made sure that that information was there to hit the different audiences who maybe aren't so graphically inclined like Instagram provides. We created custom graphics that would fit within this scope and be identifiable as connected to the project. So we made these graphics in-house using PowerPoint of all things. There's no need to sometimes be fancier than you have to be, but they served their purpose well. We also, at the suggestion of one of our communication coordinators, submitted the project call for volunteers to the university newsletter, Miami Matters. And not only were we featured in the newsletter, but they actually contacted the local county news office on our behalf and said, hey, we have this project that we think would be really great to highlight for the entire county. So word of mouth definitely was a major part of our experience in advertising, and that still is actually playing out. We've continued to get contacted by people who are making documentaries, as well as just looking for updates on the project, come to us within the past 3 months to ask about what it is that we're doing, whether the collection is open yet. So never really underestimate the power of word of mouth and sharing community-based projects like this. We also did our best to make sure that we emailed and emailed and emailed. We first sent a welcome email to any new volunteers on a rolling basis so that we could make sure that there was a short period of time between when it was that they submitted their form and when they heard from us to make sure that we continued to engage them. At first, we started out with weekly updates as we got more volunteers and more questions from volunteers. But as that volunteer upswing kind of slowed and started on the downward trend, we slowed these down to monthly email updates so that we didn't overwhelm our volunteers. We continue to also communicate with them through social media. And these were simple updates that were posted either with prompts. So say you maybe weren't comfortable with journaling and you didn't quite know where to start, we provided some sample questions just to get our volunteers more comfortable with the idea of kind of talking about what it was that they were experiencing. We also wanted to maintain awareness of the project in the eyes of the public in the Miami community. So these were really instrumental in terms of making sure that people kept aware of what it was that we were doing. Of course, one thing that we figured out along the way was answering questions. there's always the question of, when coordinating a project like this, do you answer just that one person and their question, or do you answer it to everyone? Especially when some people have more questions and need a little bit more hand-holding than others. We reached a happy medium and made a case-by-case judgment. And if we thought that a question applied to everyone, or it was a question that multiple people might have, we would email both the question and the answer to our entire volunteer group base of about 90 people, and also would add it to the FAQ section that we kept on the Call for Volunteers blog post, which would eventually serve as our main kind of home base for anything relating to the project. We also learned the importance of sustainability of communication. We wanted to make sure that it was consistent and that it was often enough, but we didn't want it to completely overwhelm our participants, because it's always annoying when you get, the daily emails from places where you shop and whatnot. So we didn't want it to be that often, but we also didn't want it to be so infrequent that people questioned whether or not it was still even going on. We also had multiple project leads consisting of both myself, who is the Special Collections Librarian at Miami, and Jackie Johnson, who's our University Archivist. It helped in that we were able to split the work between us. And since I was acting as the main contact point for volunteers, it really helped to kind of streamline that question and answer process, and minimized confusion of, who do I send this question to? Do I send it to both of them? Do I send it to one of them? So that really helped. But it also was a challenge in that Jackie and I needed to make sure that we constantly were looping each other into who it was that we were talking with and answering questions about, and also making sure that our answers were the same. And also, if you're the main contact, you will get many, many, many emails. But then we had to have some legal considerations, and to discuss this, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Carla.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Carla Myers. I'm the copyright librarian here at Miami University, and so excited to be here to talk with you today, and also excited to be part of this project. Rachel, if we can go to the next slide, please. So legal considerations for this project. As Rachel and Jackie were doing all of their fabulous planning around this, they came to me and said, obviously there's some legal considerations here, and what can we do to be proactive about these? And in our discussion, we identified three main areas that we wanted to take a look at. First, of course, is copyright. The copyright in the works that people were going to be creating as part of these projects, but also the copyright considerations that were tied to the reuse of third-party materials in the works that they were creating. So, for example, maybe somebody took a clipping out of a newspaper or magazine and put it in their journal and then wrote about it. What do we need to know about copyright and their reuse of somebody else's works? There's publicity rights. So this is rights like somebody's image or a likeness that may be found in photographs that are submitted materials as part of this project. And then there's also privacy rights. And our biggest concern here was medical considerations. If people were writing about maybe their own health considerations as part of their journal, or even writing about somebody else, a friend or family member, what do we need to know about those considerations tied to their medical privacy? So Rachel, if we can go to the next slide, please. We decided we wanted to work with our Office of General Counsel on this. I'm a copyright librarian. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, but I'm not an attorney. There's a lot that I think I can provide guidance on, but the considerations tied to this were so big, we wanted to make sure we were working with legal counsel. So in reaching out to them, they initially had some reservations. It wasn't necessarily about this project per se. It was more that this time last year, when so many things were going on, the transition to online education, considerations for refunding dollars for people who had left our dorms or meal plans or things like this. This project wasn't necessarily a super high priority for them within the scope of everything else that they were doing. So what we propose is that we would take the lead, that we would investigate these ourselves, that we would work with colleagues across the nation who were looking to address these same considerations as well, and bring back to them ideas and things that we wanted to address as part of these legal considerations, and draft an agreement for copyright and other considerations that they could then provide advice and information on. And so that is what we did. We drafted our agreement and brought it back to them. Rachel, if we can go to the next slide, please. So some of the key sections of this particular agreement. The first is the grant of rights. This was something that we were all very passionate about. We didn't want people signing their copyright over to us because we see this all the time in libraries, that with publication agreements or other things, there's these whole right transfers, kind of a rights grab. We acknowledged that we didn't need that. Instead, what we did is set this up so that the people who were creating the materials kept their rights in them, but were granting us an irrevocable, worldwide royalty-free right and license to use the material in almost any capacity moving forward. This is kind of really broad language, but something that I think we run into, or at least when working with Rachel and all of our wonderful folks in this area, is that we don't necessarily have enough rights. Like maybe even if a permission was granted, it doesn't cover future uses, or it just says photocopying, but now we would make digital copies. So in asking for this kind of broad license to reproduce or use the materials in any capacity or any medium moving forward, we wanted to make sure that as technology, as formats emerge, that we would be able to adopt or make copies of these materials to fall within the scopes of these new methods. If we can go to the next slide, please, Rachel. So this is permission. This is basically saying that if you are including pictures or information about other people, that you have obtained their permission in order to be doing so. So that if you took a picture of you and your family with board game night during COVID time, you got the permission from your family to include it in this journal and be as part of this project. So that if you are including images or information about other people, that you've talked with them and gotten their permission within the scope of privacy, publicity, or any other intellectual property rights. Rachel, if we can go on to the next one, please. Representations and warranties. This sounds really fancy, doesn't it? Basically, what this is saying is that I am saying that I am the person who created this and I am able to enter into this agreement with you. So just representing that you are indeed the rights holder or the creator of the works that you are submitting and that you are prepared to enter into this agreement. If we can do the next slide, please. Indemnification. This is basically saying that the people submitting materials are agreeing to hold Miami University harmless if, as part of those materials, they disclose things that they later didn't want disclosed. That sounds kind of confusing. So say one of our journalists decided to write about their own medical considerations. Maybe not just, my concerns about COVID, but, I have diabetes, and as a result, I'm nervous about catching COVID or these complications. After the embargo period, we make these journals public, and somebody comes along and reads that that person has diabetes. And they said, well, this was the disclosure of my personal medical information. With this indemnification, because they chose to disclose it, knowing that this information would be made available publicly, that they are indemnifying us from any downstream repercussions from the information that they shared. There was some debate with the Office of General Counsel about including this, but in the end, we agreed that it would probably be important to make it very clear the importance of privacy considerations, and just in case somebody included something down the road, something that down the road they would later have concerns about, that we were clear for doing what we were empowered to do. If we can go to the next slide, please. FERPA considerations, so Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. So this generally covers scholarly materials or somebody's academic record while they're at an academic institution, K through 12 and higher education. Some of our students were creating materials that were going to be part of this project as part of a class. So we actually have a further consideration in here for those students that in us making these publicly available after the embargo period could be viewed as making part of your academic record publicly available, although there is a lot of debate as to whether an assignment is part of the academic record. But just again, to bring awareness to this, that after a time, we are going to be making this open and making sure we have the rights we need to be able to do that within the scope of this particular law. If we can go to the next slide, please. Privacy considerations. This is where we really reemphasized again that all private and personal information, including images, including health issues, including your personal beliefs, that we are going to be making these publicly available after the embargo period. Just really emphasizing, we want you to think very carefully about what you've included, and that if you have concerns about privacy, maybe you want to edit those different parts of your particular work before you give them to us for that consideration that they will be broadly available later. If we can go to the next slide, please. Highlights. So I think one of the big things is an all-in-one submission form. So when they go to submit the materials, they submit their personal information. This is who I am. They select their embargo period. They agree to this license terms. It's all in one form instead of having to do multiple forms. Our thought was that is easier for the wonderful folks who are participating in this project and sharing their materials with us. It's also easier for us on the administrative end that we don't have to check that they've gone and filled out or completed multiple things. It's all in one. This is kind of a very thorough license and release, but we really wanted to make sure all of our bases are covered. I know as a copyright librarian, and I've talked with other colleagues about this too, we'll see these amazing archival or special collections, and we've gotten some permissions, but not all of the permissions that we need to make things available to our patrons and the public. So our thought was, yes, this is really thorough, but we think with this license, our bases will be completely covered for however we want to use this collection moving forward. We really worked with the Office of General Counsel to try to keep the legal language and the license as non-lawyerly as possible. There are some things like representations and warranties that's kind of the language that we had to use, but trying to provide clear explanations of what this means, what you're agreeing to, and then contact information for questions. We made it very clear that we didn't want anybody signing the license unless they were comfortable with it and understood what they were agreeing to. So having my contact information front and center, that if anybody has questions about the language in the license, that I would be happy to go with them through the license line by line and make it very clear and help them become comfortable as to what they were agreeing to, or if they weren't comfortable, recognizing that we respect that and we're certainly not compelling anybody to sign it. If we can go to the next slide, please. So recommendations as far as these legal things, communicate early and often. I love working with these ladies, not just because they are fabulous and so enthusiastic about their jobs, but because when they're starting projects as a copyright librarian, they always come to me early because it's so much easier for me to like jump in and provide information and guidance when we're getting started so we can build from that up. As versus there have been situations where I'm kind of brought in at the end of the project and we have to do a lot of backtracking to catch up on some of the legal things. Drawing upon the resources for the community made this possible. I think it was kind of a lot and overwhelming for us to be thinking about all of these considerations, but reaching out to the folks in the archive and library community, seeing what other folks were doing, what types of licensed languages other folks had put together, allowed us not only to, I think, get a really holistic idea of the legal considerations here, but during a really busy and hectic time for everybody, keep from reinventing the wheel, pull what we could from others to create our own license agreement, and then customize that to our particular needs. Whenever possible, foster a relationship with your Office of General Counsel. Unfortunately, I think lawyers get a really bad rep. It's just the way they're portrayed in, movies and TV and books. The vast majority of attorneys that I have worked with in my career are wonderful people who are actually eager for our input, because very frequently we know more about these issues or practices than they do. So we can bring to the table, here's what we want to do. Here's the common and valued and recognized practices within the scope of libraries and archives, and how does this mesh up with the legal considerations here? And when you're drafting these agreements, plan for any eventuality, but be flexible. If somebody comes to you with concern about some of the language in the license, be prepared to kind of change that or make accommodations where you can to make them comfortable with what they're signing. Next slide, please, Rachel. And those were our legal considerations. I am now excited to hand this off to talk more about submissions and processing.
Good afternoon, I'm Jackie Johnson, University Archivist, and I'll be talking about submissions and processing. Next slide, please. So for the submissions, we received diaries, journals, and photographs, mostly born digital materials, but we did receive some paper products. Firsthand accounts, it was important that we encouraged people who submitted items to give us things that talked about the actual events that happened during the pandemic. And it's important that when you're asking people to give you items, that it really talks about the actual event itself. Next slide, please. Surprise submissions. Well, we were surprised. We received things that we thought we would never receive. Like example, for signs, we asked for journals, and someone wanted to donate signs to us, which I thought was pretty interesting. So it's important to remind the people who are giving you the items to stick to the submission requirements. Next slide. Processing. All the items will be processed and be included in an archive space record, and the materials will be made available to the public.
Okay, so my name is Kim Hoffman, and I am the preservation librarian here at Miami. And I'll talk a little bit about moving forward and preserving this collection once we have those submissions and we've seen what type of submission we got and they've been processed. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so as part of my role, I think a lot about how to make sure that all of our collection is preserved in good condition in perpetuity or as close as possible. So commonly people think about the physical collection when it comes to preservation, but actually born digital items and digital collections can be as fragile or even much more fragile than our physical collection. So digital preservation is the way that we approach making sure that we're able to keep accessing those digital artifacts going into the future. The definition here is that digital preservation refers to the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. So that includes things like migrating file formats and writing policies and storage considerations. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about digital collections, and this may be something that you think about, for example, for your own digital files, there are a couple of major risks. One is physical damage to the device storing the data. So if you imagine that you have a flash drive and it's at the bottom of a box or something, and say it gets crushed, that's this risk. If the device itself is damaged, then it may in turn damage the data, and that potentially could become unrecoverable. The next risk is degradation of the data itself, which is also known as bit rot. So sometimes this is caused by physical damage, but we don't always know what causes it. It can be an inherent vice or an inherent weakness of the storage device or the chip that data is stored on. And what this means is that over time, individual little units of data known as a bit can flip from a 1 to a 0. And what that can mean is, a little bit of this you might not even notice, but eventually over time it corrupts your data in a way that makes it difficult or impossible to use. And finally, archaic digital or physical formatting, which is known as digital obsolescence. The example I like to use here is old word processing formats. So today we would probably use maybe a docx file, but if you can remember maybe like a ClarisWorks file or a WordPerfect file, if you were to find that on a hard drive today, you might have a really hard time opening that file because those programs are not used anymore and that format is archaic. Next slide, please. So when we approached this project, what we wanted to do in terms of preservation is manage the risk that these files might become unusable in the future. And we also wanted to streamline the process and make it as easy to preserve these as possible. So in order to do that, we restricted acceptable file formats for journal entries. And that just meant we were focusing on file formats that we knew would be more beneficial for long-term preservation, and also limit the number of different kinds of files that we needed to think about and access. The format does matter. So it's important to choose standard and widely adopted file formats if you are thinking in terms of keeping them for the long term. What we have here is a screenshot of the form that our journal submitters filled out with their submission. And this just prompted them to use those file formats that we were hoping to see. Next slide, please. So here, a little bit larger, is the text from that form. Handwritten text, we have that on there separately because we don't really want anything printed out. So this is handwritten as opposed to printed. We'd really rather have the born digital format, but of course, if it is handwritten, we would accept it. The next is photographs. So we do mention that we'd like the highest resolution available. TIFF has historically been the standard for photographs, but JPEG 2000 is gaining steam and becoming more popular as a preservation format. So we listed that as well. Video, we gave a few different options, realizing that there are many different formats out there depending on how video is captured. And we didn't want submitters to be deterred by the necessity of, or perceived necessity of, migrating video to a new format if that's not something they were comfortable doing. Ultimately, all of these requests are in service of getting more submissions that we can maintain for longer, but we never wanted this to deter someone from submitting. For audio, WAV or broadcast WAV has been the standard for a long time, so that's what we requested. And then finally, for text in a born digital format, we asked for PDF or docx, but we really would prefer PDF. However, docx is easy enough for us to migrate to that PDF format on behalf of the submitter if that's something that they're not super comfortable with or didn't think to do. Next slide, please. So once we have these submissions, they immediately go into our form stack. That's how the submission form is hosted. And so the data initially lives on those form stack servers. The next step is that it's downloaded locally to our network drives for processing and preconditioning and checks and all that. And then uploaded to our long-term digital preservation repository, which in our case is a hosted vendor solution called Preservica. But any long-term, even homegrown solution would work here. The important thing is that we have control over the data and we understand, how the data is being preserved long-term and the steps we need to take to manage it. And next slide. So a final note here, we did allow up to a 50-year embargo period for submitters who wanted to keep their journal private due to maybe their concerns about some of the content. And that's a really long time for digital preservation. So it's hard for us to know what the future will hold for these files, but our hope is that through good management practices and continually adjusting to new best practices, as well as these groundwork steps we've laid here, these files will remain in good condition going forward. That said, just like with the physical collection, the condition of the files will determine the choices that we have in the future and what we end up ultimately being able to do with them. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'll hand it off for hopes for the future.
Thanks, Kim. So as I had mentioned before, we had a pretty decent idea of some of the potential value for a crowdsourced and or student-driven diary collection. One is research. We have seen a lot of growing interest in the student diaries collection from researchers who are looking to get a better sense of the daily life and happenings and the way in which larger global scale events have impacted individual lives as they're, living the experience, shall we say. But also we hope to be able to use it in outreach. One of the kind of top ways we're envisioning using it is in exhibitions. And there are plenty of ways that you could frame that exhibition, whether it's on lived daily life or even on, how has it been that Miami University has reacted to global pandemics and illnesses. And we also really hope to one day use it in social media or whatever form social media has taken in the future, up to 50 years from now. It's hard to imagine that Instagram will still be alive in 50 years, but if it is, maybe you'll see some of the collection floating across that. But kind of finally, we hope to be able to bring this into the classroom. This collection is going to be things that students will be able to not only be curious about, but also be able to empathize with, since a number of our submissions are from students. Even with the Smith Student Diary collection, students in the classroom get really excited and into learning about the lives of students who walked these same grounds before them. And so I think really getting to have a better idea of what that life looked like in 2020 and 2021 and how that impacted their experiences as a student are going to be instrumental for the learning experiences of future students in the Special Collections and Archives classroom. Thank you all so much for joining our presentation. I hope that you all learned something and maybe could use some of what we discussed today for future projects of your own. We're now going to move into the Q&A period, and I see some of you guys have started using the Q&A function, which is wonderful. So the first question, are projects like this really historical, or are they anthropological or sociological? And is this a way of controlling the narrative? So that's a really interesting question. I think that this is kind of all three, and it really depends on your approach to it, and to some degree knowing ahead of time that you're going to be donating it, that controls your own narrative. You're choosing how it is that you portray your lived experience, and that's something that we're willing to risk. So Kim or Carla, maybe one of you two would be willing to answer Miranda's question. How do you limit what file types were submitted? And was this something in the upload process?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And really quick on the topic of the previous question, I'm not familiar with that article, but it looks really interesting. And that's something that I think is great food for thought. In terms of the file types, that's a great question. We did not actually limit the file types that are submitted. So we were making a request and hoping that we got our preferred files, but we would rather have something in a not preferred format then get nothing. So, you know, it was the submitter's choice whether they complied with that request or not.
Thanks, Kim. So another person asked, how did you determine the length of embargo for the collection? 50 years is a long time to continuously steward those materials without access. This is a really good question, and it's something that we had chosen 50 years based on some of the embargo periods that we had with other materials in our collection. So some of the student diaries and the William E. Smith collection have been sealed for up to 100 years. So that definitely poses questions, even with physical materials, about how we're going to steward those. And it's because of that that we wanted to bring Kim early on the project so that we could say, okay, we know that 50 years is going to be a long time, especially in what is still considered to be the Wild West of digital preservation. So we've done our due diligence the best that we could. And we're hoping that we thought that 50 years would be a decent amount of time. We have had a few people indicate interest of embargoing it for longer. One of my favorites is someone said, until I die, thanks. So that 50 years, sometimes it's even that isn't enough for our participants. Kim, would you like to elaborate a little bit more?
Well, from a digital preservation standpoint, I mean, we've gotten a lot of I surprise really at the 50-year embargo. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I can only imagine that this question will come up more and more as more and more archival collections are born digital. So in a way, I think I see it as a little bit of, maybe experiment is the wrong word, but really a learning opportunity for us and a chance to set a precedent. Rachel or Jackie, what did you say to the "until I die, please" student?
You said okay. So I think we'll definitely, you know, it's one of those situations that she said that in the submission form. It's not that she asked us if that was okay in the first place. And we're willing to honor that. It's going to be a little tricky, a little interesting, because who knows where I'll be or Jackie will be. Hopefully we'll be long retired by that point. But it's definitely something that we're going to have to make sure that we meticulously document for whoever follows us.
Definitely, definitely.
That's a really good point. I think documentation is going to be key to this project at all levels going forward. That's something that we've talked a lot about.
Yes. Oh, yes. All of the documentation is super helpful, as well as, you know, incorporating the people who probably should be incorporated earlier rather than later. All right. The next question is, I've been keeping a pandemic diary to put in the archives where I work, and this has given me a lot to think about. Will you be making this slideshow available? I would be fine making it available. I can't speak for, okay, we're getting all sorts of positive affirmation here. Anita, is there any way to share with the attendees of this panel the slide deck, or would it be better to share one-on-one?
The whole session is being recorded and will be available in about 2 weeks on YouTube. And my understanding is that it will actually not be restricted to just Mac people.
Oh, awesome.
So that was news to me today. That's what I understand.
Excellent.
And there is a part that you can share your slides as well, I believe, on the Google Drive. And we'll make sure we get that addressed to you if you don't already have that.
Okay, that would be awesome. But yes, Allison, we definitely would be happy to share our slide deck with you. What other questions do you guys have?
I have a question. Do you all remember any examples of some of the signs or the non-journal entries, and how did you decide whether those would be allowed or not allowed?
Yeah, so I do remember some of the signs. Actually, I really quite enjoyed my entire correspondence with the person who wanted to donate the sign. She was one of the people that I really got to know throughout this process, which was, I think, the best part of it all, getting to know different members of the community. And some of the signs were just kind of meant to cheer up the neighborhood and help to keep people's spirits lifted up during this difficult time. So what we ended up agreeing with her on was she would take a picture of the sign instead of donating each and every sign to us. She would take a picture of it and then also add in a little bit of commentary about what she was thinking when she made that sign and why, and what she was hoping that people would get from it. So I think that that was going to be really useful on a lot of different angles.
That's great. I have another question too. Have we received any submissions that are not born digital, and what were those like?
We have. I actually, Jackie, I've been meaning to share this with you. I have one on my desk as we speak. And so one of the things that we did as part of the overall outreach later down the game was Jackie got in contact with people in the Honors College and asked and just let them know about this. And so we actually got a number of submissions from people in the Honors College after their first semester. And one of these people kept a physical journal. In my mind, she went above and beyond because she did not wait until just the end of the semester and go through only the end of the semester. She went all the way through winter break, unlike some of her peers. So it's really great to also have a physical object to add to the collection in addition to the born digital. Did the submitters also provide their address or contact information when they signed the agreement? The answer to this is yes. Yes, they did. But we also, in that form, asked them whether or not they would like to be anonymous in the overall archive. So I think Carla may be able to add a little bit more to that.
Yeah, let me share a link to the form. I'm going to put this in the chat. Sorry, my cat's on my keyboard, so I have to lean over. So if you want to take a look at some of the information that we asked, what's your name, your email address, mailing address, although you will see there that if you want to remain anonymous, that's fine. We asked about what is their status, their geographic location, their self-identified occupation, what format of materials they would be submitting, and they could check multiple options there. If any of the material was created as part of a class assignment. We also asked their age because we needed to have folks 18 and older participating in this. And then you'll see asking about the embargo period. And once you click on the age button, that is when the license agreement will pop up and provide more information if you want to see a little bit more details about that. And then toward the bottom, you'll just see the things that they agreed to, and that by typing my name below, I agree, I certify. And then if they wanted to submit those physical copies, that would have given a flag to Rachel and Jackie to follow up with them to set up a time for those to be dropped off.
So for people to remain anonymous, do we retain all that demographic information? That's a really great question. So ideally, we'll keep just enough of the demographic information to better inform people about the object, but we also are very aware of the fact that people may be trying to track backwards, right? So we're going to do our best to find that happy medium. Jackie, would you be willing to give a little bit more insight?
Well, no, you want to elaborate some more and I'll continue to listen to you.
All right. So yeah, one of the things that we definitely want to keep is kind of that information on their connection to the Miami community. That was really one of the major tenets of the project, was to fit within our audience scope. You had to have some type of relationship to Miami University. Of course, the degree to which you're associated with Miami University, we were flexible on. So if you were a student, staff, or faculty member, of course you're connected to the university. We want your stuff. But we also had people who were alumni. We had people who were parents of students. We had people who were spouses or family members of people who worked at the university. So we really want to kind of capture that relationship. And so I think that was pretty much the main piece of demographic information that we really want to keep with the object. If it's anonymous, it'll also help us to kind of sort between the anonymous entries, especially since many of them will have very similar date ranges.
Yeah.
But other than that, we're going to use our best ethical judgment possible based on what is in the submission entry, and also if there was any notes added to the donor form.
Yeah, the reason I asked Rachel to elaborate some more is because this project was her idea. She approached me about this, and I just understand if someone's that passionate, right? They should be able to speak, just continue to explain everything, because she was the brainchild behind this. If it wasn't for Rachel, we wouldn't be here sitting here, because this project would not have happened. But I think it's important for us to understand something that's important for archives and special collections. We can make rules and regulations, which I think is good because it protects us. This was a once in a lifetime event. Hopefully we'll never live through another pandemic again, correct? So I really like the fact that Rachel and Kim and Carla found ways to include people in the project. Because sometimes we can make rules and regulations and people say, well, I can't understand what's going on. I don't want to be a part of that. But I think that because of the professionalism of Carla with general counsel and Rachel with what she was talking about in terms of the requirements for submissions and processing, and Kim's expertise when it comes to taking care of the items and creating criteria for that, the project came together splendidly, I should say. It was a splendid project.
It was 100% a team effort, and
Yes.
I could not have made any of this happen
Right.
without the support of everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that,
yeah, because we could have found ways to say, no, we can't take that. Like the signs, when the patron, she said we would have signs. I remember Rachel called me and said, Jackie, she wants to donate signs. What do we do? I said, what do you mean signs? She says, no, physical signs. And I said, well, Rachel, what do you think we should do? And she said, well, Jackie, let's take pictures. I said, perfect solution. So that way the patron doesn't feel as if you're kind of like pushing them away and not including them. So you always want to find a solution that involves the patrons. So that, and you never know. Next year, she may want to give us more things. You never know what people want, what they're thinking about, because we said yes to the first request. That was kind of different, but we made it work as a team. We were a team throughout the entire process, which is important.
absolutely. And thank you, Meg, for your kind congratulations. So we have a question. Was the 50-year embargo period automatic, or was it requested? So it was completely up to the donor at the time of the donation, whether or not they would choose to make it available immediately after processing, or we also offered kind of incremental, so they could have it embargoed for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. We wanted to make sure that there was a range of options available to people because people all have different comfort levels. So we really wanted to make that their choice. And we have another question. How much administrative support have we received? We have received so much support from this administration, not
Sure.
only in the library. We could not have done this without our department head saying, yeah, go for it. He was kind of the first one who gave me the green light. So that was really exciting. And then also whenever we hit a snag, it wasn't just us as a team of 4, 5 plus our department head fighting for it. It was like our AD was invested, our dean of libraries was invested, even folks at the broader university level. So the head of university communications, he also was invested in what we were doing. So definitely getting the buy-in from the entire collective community really helped us as we continued to move forward.
I think the important word that Rachel just said was community. Everybody was involved and they all had buy-in and they felt they were a part of it. We weren't exclusive, we were inclusive, right? We wanted everyone to be a part of what the project was.
These are great questions. Does anyone else have any final questions? I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 more, depending on how quick we are in answering. Well, if no one has any further questions, just as a gentle reminder, please don't forget to check out the virtual posters and tours of MAC that are currently being offered. And please fill out the MAC 2021 survey to let the planning committee know their experiences. Special thanks to the MAC planning committee for putting this entire program together and for helping us moving forward with this presentation.